I woke up to the sound of wedding bells. Not the metaphorical kind, not the distant sound of a church ceremony far away, but actual, real wedding bells ringing from somewhere on my farm. At first, I thought I was dreaming. Maybe Mrs. Thompson, my nosy neighbor, had finally gone full-blown eccentric and decided to hold a parade in my honor. But as I stepped out onto my porch, rubbing my eyes, what I saw nearly made me drop my coffee mug. There, right in the middle of my property, stood an extravagant wedding setup. Rows of white chairs, a floral arch, a long red carpet leading up to an altar, and a full buffet table loaded with expensive-looking food. Guests in designer dresses and tuxedos milled about, champagne glasses in hand, laughing like they belonged here. And right in the center of it all, barking orders at a group of panicked-looking caterers, was Karen. Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of entitlement. The same woman who once threw a fit at the local farmer's market because I wouldn't sell her goat milk at half price. The same woman who made every cashier in town miserable with her demands for special treatment. And now, here she was, hosting a full-blown wedding on my farm without even asking. I stormed down the steps, cutting across my field, dodging confused guests who looked at me like I was the intruder. A waiter carrying a tray of hors d'oeuvres gave me a polite nod before offering me a shrimp cocktail. I resisted the urge to grab the whole tray and chuck it into the air out of sheer frustration. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice even as I approached a woman in a headset who was nervously flipping through a clipboard. "What the hell is going on here?" She barely spared me a glance. "Sir, I'm a little busy. If you need assistance, please speak with the event planner." "The event planner?" I repeated. "I own this farm." That got her attention. She looked up, her eyes widening in horror. "Oh. Oh no." "Oh yes," I said, crossing my arms. "So, I'll ask again. What going on?" Before she could answer, a familiar, grating voice cut through the crowd like nails on a chalkboard. "Oh, for heaven's sake, what now?" Karen emerged, dressed in an over-the-top lavender gown, dripping in pearls, and holding a flute of champagne like she was royalty. She took one look at me and sighed dramatically, as if I were the inconvenience here. "Oh, it's you," she said, waving a hand dismissively. "What's the problem?" "What's the—" I laughed, completely dumbfounded. "Karen, you're hosting a wedding on my property without even asking." Karen rolled her eyes. "Relax, it's just for the day. It's my niece's wedding. I needed a scenic venue, and your farm was just perfect. You should be flattered." "Flattered?" I said, my voice rising. "You trespassed, set up an entire event, invited hundreds of people onto my land, and didn't even have the decency to ask me?" "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she scoffed, taking a sip of her champagne. "You weren't using this space. It's just a bunch of fields. And besides, I tried calling you." I pulled out my phone. "Funny, I don't see any missed calls." She waved her hand again. "Details. The point is, the wedding is already happening, and it's too late to change anything. So why don't you just go back to whatever it is you do, and let us celebrate?" I looked around, still struggling to process what was happening. The bride and groom, Karen's niece and her fiancé, seemed oblivious to the fact that they were essentially committing wedding theft. The guests laughed, clinked glasses, and enjoyed the stolen scenery. And then Karen smirked. "Besides, you should be grateful for the exposure. Imagine all the business you'll get after this." That was it. That was the moment the last shred of my patience snapped like an old fence post in a storm. She thought she could just waltz onto my land, throw a party, and expect me to thank her for it? I inhaled deeply, forcing a smile. "You know what, Karen? You're right. It is too late to change anything. The wedding is already happening." Karen grinned, smug and satisfied. "Exactly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have important guests to attend to." I turned and walked away, keeping my face neutral as I made my way back to the barn. I could still hear the laughter, the clinking glasses, the live string quartet playing some elegant tune. But in my mind, I was already setting my plan into motion. Because if Karen wanted to pretend like she owned my farm, she was about to get the full farm experience. I reached the barn and whistled softly. Within seconds, the heads of my most reliable troublemakers poked out. Bessie, my headstrong goat with a particular love for eating things she shouldn't. Thor, the self-proclaimed leader of the herd, who once chewed through the wiring of my truck just for fun. And of course, little Peanut, who looked innocent but had a gift for sneaking into places he had no business being. I opened the gate, grinning. "Go get your snacks, boys." Like a perfectly trained army, they trotted out, their eyes locked on the buffet table in the distance. By the time I made it back to the wedding, the chaos had already begun. A shriek rang through the air. "Oh my God, there's a goat eating the wedding cake!" I strolled back in just as the horror unfolded. Bessie had climbed onto the buffet table, shoving her face into a plate of salmon. Thor had already headbutted a waiter, sending a tray of champagne flutes crashing to the ground. And little Peanut? He had somehow made his way onto the dance floor, knocking over an elderly guest's cane before launching himself onto the DJ booth. Guests screamed. Someone tried to chase Bessie, but she was already halfway through demolishing the floral arrangements. A bridesmaid tripped over a goat, landing face-first into a pile of hors d'oeuvres. Karen's face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before as she shrieked in horror. "Jake," she bellowed. "Call them off." I took my sweet time, crossing my arms as I watched my goats wreak absolute havoc. "Oh, I would, Karen. But, you know, it's too late to change anything. The party's already happening." She let out an enraged scream as Bessie leapt onto the head table, knocking over the centerpiece and leaving a trail of chewed-up petals in her wake. Guests ran in all directions, dodging rampaging goats, tripping over chairs, trying to save what little was left of the wedding. And as Karen flailed helplessly, watching her perfect event turn into a barnyard disaster, I leaned against a fence post, taking in the beautiful sight. It was, without a doubt, the best wedding I had ever been to. The wedding had officially descended into chaos, and it was a thing of beauty. Guests were screaming, dodging rogue goats as they tore through the buffet, knocking over expensive dishes and table decorations like they were competing in some kind of farm animal demolition derby. The DJ tried to keep the music going, but that effort was quickly abandoned when Peanut jumped onto the booth, sending the sound system crashing to the ground in a spectacular explosion of static and sparks. The best man attempted to grab a plate of food before Thor, my most ambitious goat, snatched it right out of his hands and galloped away triumphantly. Karen, standing in the middle of the wreckage, looked as if she had just witnessed a biblical plague. Her perfectly styled hair had been ruined by a rogue splash of champagne, her lavender dress was now smeared with cake frosting, and her designer heels were sinking hopelessly into the dirt. She was screaming at anyone who would listen, but the wedding staff had already abandoned ship, backing away as if they wanted no part in whatever catastrophe was unfolding. Even the bride and groom, completely blindsided by the turn of events, stood frozen in stunned silence as a goat attempted to nibble on the bride's veil. I casually strolled through the destruction, making my way toward the buffet table as if I were merely an innocent observer in all of this. Bessie, my most gluttonous goat, had her entire head buried inside a large salad bowl, chewing enthusiastically. A waiter, apparently still clinging to the hope that something could be salvaged, lunged forward in an attempt to shoo her away. Bessie, entirely unbothered, lifted her head and released a loud, satisfied burp in his face. He stumbled backward, looking as if he had just been personally betrayed by the animal kingdom. I finally reached Karen, who turned to me with the kind of rage that could melt steel. Her hands were shaking, her face was a shade of red I didn't even know was possible, and she looked like she was about 2 seconds away from throwing an actual tantrum. "Jake," she screeched, her voice so shrill that a few nearby goats actually flinched. "Call them off. Now." I took a deep breath, as if I were considering her demand. Then I looked around at my goats, happily feasting, head-butting wedding guests, and generally treating the entire event like their personal playground. I shrugged. I would, I said, with the most innocent expression I could manage, but, you know, it's kind of hard to stop something once it's already in motion. It's like a wedding, really. Once it starts, you just have to let it play out. Karen looked like she was about to explode. This is not a wedding. This is a disaster. I casually picked up a piece of untouched cake from a nearby table and took a bite. It was surprisingly good. Really? Because it looks like a great wedding to me. Fun, lively, memorable. I'd say it's a success. Karen let out an enraged scream and stomped her foot like a toddler. I will have you arrested for this. That got my attention. I raised an eyebrow, swallowing the bite of cake. Oh really? And what exactly are you going to tell the cops, Karen? That you trespassed on my land, threw a wedding without my permission, and then got mad when my farm animals acted like farm animals. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She clearly hadn't expected to be backed into a corner this quickly. Unfortunately for her, she was dealing with someone who actually had the upper hand. I had every legal right to be furious. This was my property, and she had taken it over like some entitled queen, expecting me to just roll over and accept it. If she thought she was going to threaten me into submission, she had another thing coming. But just when I thought I had completely won this battle, Karen did something that I hadn't expected. She pulled out her phone, her eyes gleaming with the kind of vindictive joy that only someone like her could muster. "You think you're so smart?" she sneered. "Well, let's see how smart you feel when the cops are on their way." I watched as she dialed, speaking quickly into the phone. My confidence wavered for just a second. I knew I was in the right, but the idea of the police showing up to my farm in the middle of this absolute disaster wasn't exactly appealing. It wouldn't be hard for Karen to twist the story, to paint me as some unhinged farmer who had attacked an innocent wedding. And even if the truth eventually came out, the hassle of dealing with it wasn't something I particularly wanted. I glanced at my goats, who were still going strong. Thor had somehow managed to get a hold of a tablecloth and was now engaged in a very aggressive tug-of-war with an elderly guest who looked like she was reconsidering every life decision that had led her to this moment. Bessie had moved on from the salad and was now attempting to climb onto a gift table, knocking over presents in the process. Meanwhile, Peanut had taken his rightful place on the dance floor, gleefully stomping on the remains of a shattered wine glass. Karen finished her call and smirked at me. "You're in trouble now," I sighed. This was about to get messy. 10 minutes later, the wail of sirens cut through the air, and the already frantic wedding guests scattered even further. A pair of police officers stepped out of their cruiser, taking in the scene with identical expressions of disbelief. One of them had the misfortune of stepping too close to Bessie, who immediately attempted to nibble at his belt. He swatted her away, eyes narrowing as he looked at me. "Sir," he said, "would you care to explain what's going on here?" Before I could answer, Karen jumped in, throwing herself forward like she was the tragic victim of an unspeakable crime. "Officer, thank God you're here. This man is completely out of control. He let wild animals loose at my niece's wedding, they've destroyed everything, and he refuses to take responsibility." I stared at her, amazed by her ability to tell a half-truth with such conviction. The officers turned to me, waiting for my side of the story. I crossed my arms. "Well, officer, here's the thing. This is my farm. I never gave permission for this wedding to happen here. These people trespassed, set up an entire event without asking me, and expected me to just deal with it. So I let my goats enjoy the party." The officers exchanged a glance. One of them sighed, rubbing his forehead like he already had a headache. "Do you have proof that she trespassed?" I grinned. "I do one better. I have a witness." As if on cue, Mrs. Thompson emerged from behind a tree, clutching her smartphone like it was the Holy Grail. "I got everything on video," she announced proudly. He's telling the truth. That woman stole his farm for a wedding, and now she's trying to play the victim. Typical Karen behavior. Karen's face drained of color. You old hag. Mrs. Thompson grinned. Careful now, dear. I might just send this to the news. The officers nodded. All right, looks like we have enough here. Ma'am, you're going to need to come with us for questioning. Karen let out an ear-piercing screech as they led her away, flailing like a child denied a toy. The guests, now thoroughly humiliated, began quietly gathering their things, making their way toward the exit in the most awkward walk of shame imaginable. I looked around at the mess, then down at my goats, who were still happily chewing on wedding decorations. With a deep, satisfied breath, I gave them an approving nod. Good work, team. The aftermath of the Great Goat Invasion was something to behold. The once pristine wedding venue, which had been a picture of elegance and refinement just an hour ago, now looked like a battlefield where the victors were four-legged, hungry, and completely unapologetic. Torn flower arrangements littered the ground, trampled into the dirt alongside shattered champagne flutes and chunks of a once magnificent wedding cake. The gift table was overturned, half the presents opened and scattered across the grass, thanks to Thor's determination to rip through anything that looked remotely edible. Guests tiptoed around the carnage, muttering in disbelief, trying to make sense of the absolute disaster that had unfolded before their eyes. Karen, now being firmly escorted toward a police car, had not yet lost her fighting spirit. Her hair was disheveled, her dress was ruined, and she looked about 2 seconds away from foaming at the mouth. She kept turning back, her eyes blazing with fury, shouting things that barely made sense. This isn't over. I will sue you for every penny you have. You have ruined my niece's special day. You are a menace, an absolute. Her rant was cut off as she tripped over a knocked-over centerpiece, landing with a spectacular splat in a pile of goat droppings. The silence that followed was deafening. Someone in the crowd, possibly a wedding guest who had been subjected to one too many of Karen's tantrums, started laughing. Another guest snorted, then tried to hide it behind a cough. And then, as if a dam had burst, the entire crowd erupted into full-blown laughter. Even the officers escorting her to the squad car had to turn away, their shoulders shaking with the effort to maintain their professionalism. Karen, humiliated beyond belief, scrambled to her feet, looking around wildly as if trying to find someone to blame for the cruel joke the universe had just played on her. Her niece, the actual bride, stood nearby, covering her face with both hands, clearly wanting to disappear into thin air. The officers managed to get Karen into the back of the car, though she was still shouting about lawsuits and revenge as they closed the door behind her. Mrs. Thompson, ever the opportunist, took one last picture of the scene with her phone, giving me a wink as she did. That one's going on the neighborhood Facebook page, she said cheerfully. Might even make it into the town newsletter if I write a good enough caption. I chuckled, shaking my head. Just make sure you spell trespassing correctly. Wouldn't want Karen's inevitable legal threats to have any ammunition. With Karen removed from the equation, the wedding guests slowly began collecting themselves, trying to salvage what little dignity remained. The bride and groom, who had been in shock for the majority of the chaos, finally approached me, looking thoroughly embarrassed. "We are so sorry about this," the bride said, her voice small but sincere. "We had no idea she did all of this. She told us she had booked the venue legitimately. We would never have agreed to this if we knew." Her groom nodded, rubbing the back of his neck. "We don't want you to think we were part of this. Honestly, if we could go back in time and elope, we probably would." I studied them for a moment, trying to gauge if they were being honest or just trying to smooth things over. But the mortified look on their faces was enough proof that they had been just as blindsided as I had been. "I believe you," I said finally, sighing. "And honestly, I don't blame you. Karen is, well, Karen." The bride managed a weak smile. "That's putting it mildly." I looked around at the destroyed venue, the goats still lazily munching on what was left of the decorations, and then back at them. Tell you what. You didn't ask for this mess, and it's your wedding day. If you want, I'll help you set up a little area in the back pasture. It won't be anything fancy, but it'll be peaceful. You can have a real moment, without all this nonsense. Their eyes lit up like I had just offered them a golden ticket out of hell. That would be amazing, the bride said, clutching her groom's hand. Really, thank you. We just wanted to get married today. That's all we cared about. Then let's make it happen, I said. With the help of a few remaining guests, we managed to clear out a small area behind the barn, setting up a makeshift altar using some wooden crates and a few wildflowers from the field. It was simple, unpolished, and a complete contrast to the lavish disaster Karen had tried to stage, but it had something the original wedding lacked: genuine happiness. The officiant, who had miraculously stuck around despite everything, stood at the front, while the guests who chose to stay gathered around. The bride and groom stood together, no longer weighed down by the chaos, just two people who wanted to start their lives together. And in that moment, as the sun set behind them, casting a golden glow over the field, it was actually beautiful. Of course, the goats were still there, watching with mild interest. But they had lost their enthusiasm for destruction and were now just lazily grazing nearby. Even Peanut, the little troublemaker, seemed content to sit and watch. When the ceremony ended, the couple kissed to the cheers of their remaining friends and family. I clapped along with everyone else, despite the surreal nature of everything that had led to this moment. The bride turned to me as the guests started mingling, her expression soft. You didn't have to do this for us. I shrugged. Maybe not. But I figured something good should come out of today. She smiled. Well, it did. And we'll never forget it. The guests who had stuck around helped clean up the worst of the wreckage, though it was going to take a few more days to fully restore my land to normal. As the sun dipped lower, the remaining guests made their way home, leaving me standing in the quiet field with my goats, who had done an excellent job of finishing off whatever scraps of food remained. Mrs. Thompson strolled up beside me, her arms crossed as she surveyed the damage. Well, she said, that was the most entertaining thing I've seen in years. I smirked. I aim to please. She laughed. You do know Karen's going to try something, right? She doesn't take embarrassment well. Oh, I know, I said, stretching. But I also know she's got a whole town full of people who just watched her go down in flames. She's not going to have many allies. Mrs. Thompson nodded, satisfied. Well, if she tries anything, you know where to find me. I've got more than enough footage to remind her why she should never mess with a farmer. I chuckled, watching as my goats started to settle in for the night. I think I'll sleep just fine knowing that. As I turned to head back to my house, I glanced back at my land, now covered in the aftermath of the strangest day I'd ever had. It wasn't perfect. It was messy, ridiculous, and full of unexpected disasters. But somehow, in the end, it had turned out exactly as it was supposed to.